And it's actually from the book of Esther in the Bible of all places. It talks about Mordecai, who was a leader in that time.
A leader is also a light in the darkness.
I think differently, and now I believe in myself because I'm around him, and I think even more is possible.
Welcome to Leading Lubbock, where we spotlight the voices shaping our city and beyond. Today, I'm joined by Dusty Thompson, founding and lead pastor of Redeemer Lubbock, visionary leader, and all-around fun expert. A Texas Tech grad with a doctorate in ministry, Dusty has spent 17 years building a thriving church while leading with purpose in his family and community. He's a husband, a father, a die-hard Red Raider fan, and when he's not casting vision, he's casting a fly line in the Rockies. In this episode, we talk leadership, faith, family, and the lessons that come from both success and struggle. Let's dive in. All right, here we are today. We got episode 10 of Leading Lubbock, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with Dusty Thompson, really good friend of mine, also somebody that I get to watch on a weekly basis at the church I attend. So get to see you lead from a church platform, but also get to watch how you lead your friends and your family, and just really encouraged by you, Dusty. So I'm excited that you're here today. I'm excited to get to hear a little bit of your story and then be able to get that out to people too who maybe don't know who you are. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to do it and love the idea of this podcast a lot.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Dusty, so I mentioned you're at Redeemer Lubbock, or you're a pastor. So you're a pastor leader there. And then also you have two kids. You got Roman and JJ, and then married to Amy Thompson. So you've got family and you've got, life all around you, and you're probably staying pretty busy, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement. Of course, I would bet everybody you've got on that podcast here probably is saying something pretty similar to that. But yeah, Amy and I will hit 30 years in May, and Redeemer just turned 17. So we planted that 17 years ago, and then Roman just is wrapping up college, about to start work in real estate actually here in town, and then JJ's a freshman in high school. So that's those things definitely have some pace to them, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, freshman in high school. So you're doing the sports stuff. You're doing
it's football,
shuttling around.
Oh yeah, football, baseball, track are his three at this point. So there's something or another nearly year round. Got a couple of months off in the winter, and but I mean we've loved it. I mean, I'll be sad when all that's over.
Yeah, and then something about you that I know just from, I think, proximity is maybe you love to fish a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I don't know. Have I mentioned that in the sermon? Has that come up? I don't know.
I think maybe once I overheard
I love it.
Yeah.
I do love that. It's probably out of all of and I've got lots of hobbies. There's hardly a hobby that I meet that I don't think I would really like to do. But yeah, I do love to fly fish specifically. So we've got a place up in Colorado, and any chance I get, I'd love to fish that, and anywhere else. I got my top fishing buddy Landon, along with my oldest fishes a lot too, Roman. So those two are my top two fishing buddies that we like to go whenever we can. Yeah,
that's awesome. I do a little bit. I wish I was at your level, but
once get out in the water, man.
Once a year, I try to send you a picture of a catch that comes up. So I'll try to keep that going.
Just keep getting out there. You're on a lake, so you can. That'll work too.
Just get some practice. Yeah. All right, man. Well, let's get into some leadership, because you were nominated by Holly Duncan. She had nothing but great things to say about you, and as a phenomenal leader that she is, I know there's a lot of respect that comes with that. So, I want to hear what you have to say about what would you say effective leadership looks like?
Well, first of all, if Holly in any way attached me to her, that sounds like a major win for me right there. So I'll take that. Yeah, so I think effective leadership is, I think you got to look at the basic principles of it. It's like, all right, are you moving someplace in a direction? And then the second component of that would be, is anybody following you to that direction? Both of those are the key variables, that you can have people following you, but it's not to a good direction, or you don't even know what the direction is. People are just following you. Or you could be personally going towards a direction and kind of crusading for it and advocating for it, but no one's being influenced towards that, moving that way. And so I think those would be the two variables, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And how has that evolved over time for you? Is that something that you feel like your perspective has always kind of been that way on leadership, or there anything in your life that maybe led you to more of that definition?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably been an evolution of it that, sometimes for leaders, and I would say this has been this way for me. I don't know that I'm a good leader, but I think I have been a leader over, my lifetime really, especially in adulthood. And I think some of it is almost like intuitive. You look up and you have influence, and, people kind of want to do what you're doing, or they get excited about what you get excited about, and you just notice it happening. And so I think that part is almost intuitive. You just get a feel for it. But then I think the part you kind of grow into is like, okay, so you have some influence, but like, what are you influencing towards? Like, where is this going? Because I can influence you into fly fishing. I was just trying just that. But, that's good. That's a great hobby we could enjoy together someday. But is there some greater purposes, organizational objectives, or, in my world, there are organizational objectives, but even more importantly, like the spiritual objectives and meaning of life objectives and things like that. So I think that's the thing that I've grown into is where am I going personally that I might be taking other people to, and are those the right things?
Do you think that's maybe an obstacle right now in leadership with many of your substantial leaders, not you, but around us in culture, that we're leading but not necessarily intentional about where the leadership is going?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if someone is a leader, and you can usually almost like spot them, going, okay, there's a lot of influence, and you've already had several on your podcast, and the ones I know on that generally are moving towards a direction with some purpose. But a lot of times that's exactly what happens is you've got a leader that is maybe hasn't really thought through where exactly all this is going, or maybe even just gaining a following because it feels good sometimes to have that kind of influence or to have a sense of status or importance, those kind of things. But that ends up being not super helpful towards you or the people that you might be moving in that direction. I think that's one thing. And then I think the other component is maybe where you do have like a really clear objective. And I've seen this a lot in my world in church work, where you have a young leader that wants to plant a church or wants to do some kind of ministry work, and they're really clear on the mission and what they want it to be, but they might lack the ability to like lead people, that's just not who they are. That's not their wiring, that they're just not going to be an influencer in those ways. And they have other things they could contribute, but their sphere of leadership, I think everyone can be a leader. It's just a question of what's the capacity and the breadth of that influence.
Yeah. So you have 2 kids and a wife that you're leading at home. And how would you say, like, you could take that definition of leadership where it's having a place to go and having that following? How can you put that into the perspective of your family? Because really that's how we all relate. Many of us will relate through, we may not be leaders in our businesses, but we're leaders at home. We're leaders in our friend circles. So what does that look like to know where you're going and have a direction there?
Well, I mean, a lot of that to me comes down to, a lot of the spiritual things that I believe about, okay, what's life really all about? When you boil it all down, there's got to be something bigger than making money, the next deal, your kids' baseball, and all those are all great and really important, but where's it all going? And what's really significant? What's worth really giving your life towards? And so how I've answered that question is that knowing Jesus, following Jesus is the most important thing that I want to build my whole life around. And I want to facilitate that in every direction. And so I want to facilitate that at home. Now, when we say like lead my wife, I mean, I think there's a component of that Amy's actually the stronger leader. You probably should have had her on first. And that's something we very much are together on. We're moving in step on that we both want to, follow Jesus, honor Jesus with everything we touch, including our careers and our children. So yeah, I think that's the clear like direction and mission it's to please the Lord. And we really truly, like how I view leadership at home is my job isn't to tell Amy like, no, we can't buy that new truck or something like that, as much as it is like, it's my job as the leader to help her flourish in every way, for her to absolutely maximize her potential, career-wise, personally, emotionally, spiritually, in every way. I want this woman to thrive more that she was with me than if she was single and not with me, And then that same thing would be true for my 2 guys, is that I want them to be glad I was their dad and that I was for them, and that they know that even my faith and the direction that I've set, that I would love for them to join me on as they age, is something that was real and authentic, and that it would be compelling. And that's probably my biggest hope that in all of that, and that they would have all the tools in the world to be successful and to have a great life. Yes, to all that, but there would be something that they knew what I was about.
Yeah. How do you keep going on your worst days? I mean, I know there's really good days where you are influencing well, your wife is flourishing because of your positive influence, but then there's the hard days. And what would you say gets you through and keeps you motivated and keeps going?
Well, there's plenty of those, because anybody that is leading anything at all, that leadership is really hard, and there are organizational obstacles, and not everybody is always agreeing with directional commitments you've got, and even sometimes the family. I mean, we've all got our own things, and sometimes you have an argument, and sometimes your kids do weird things, and all those things happen, and so there's lots of chances to do the thing you're asking about. And so all I know to do is to, I mean, number one, again, this is where my spiritual life with the Lord is such a great resource, is that I can take those frustrations and concerns to Him. But I think it's one of the real marks of leadership. And I'm really glad you've asked the questions this way about home life, maybe even before career, vocational things, is because it's really the same thing, is that you're going to find obstacles and frustration. And really what you want to do is keep moving in that direction, and moving towards, again, this is where that spiritual life is that defining thing for me, moving towards the Lord, trusting Him when things aren't maybe playing out according to my plans. And there's some real humility in all that, of everybody doesn't have the script that's in my head, and I have to be patient and deal with setbacks and take those frustrations there. And honestly, even you're asking a lot of family questions, but my family even seeing me, struggle through some of these setbacks. And I think even some of those things, it's not always up and to the right, but sometimes seeing you deal with adversity and failure, I mean, that's real stuff. And seeing you cry and seeing you be hurt, mm-hmm. and keeping moving forward,
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think are you familiar with Ed Wentz?
Yeah.
So he was on a few weeks ago, and one of the things that he talked about was this incorporation of bringing family and business together, and where he would come home and he would bring almost a roundtable discussion, the issues that were going on at work, and ask him, what would you guys do in that situation?
Oh, wow.
So really modeling, and that's what I hear you saying, is walking it out, that even when it's not easy, and when there's the challenges of how do you do that? And how are you going to walk through it? Because that's teaching them how to handle it in the future when it comes their way. So
I love that. Ed's a really wise man, and that seems really wise to me. I think some of the best spiritual and emotional conversations we've ever had are debriefing days, whether it's a challenge one of us is going through, or one of our boys that they've had a setback, either a bad grade, or that they didn't play well in a game, and they're really wondering if they're going to be able to do the next thing they want to do. And it's just interesting how you step into failure, and it's actually a really vulnerable space, but it's actually a point of common ground for somebody. Could be 13 or 52.
Yeah. And we're going to face it.
Yeah. And we are facing it all the time.
Yeah. Man, that's good. Well, how do you embody leadership in your daily life? And are there habits that you do on a regular basis that help you in your leadership? But what does that look like for Dusty on a day-to-day?
Yeah, so I'll tell you something I've learned on this is I did a training cohort starting in 2020. So that's an interesting year to be doing something like that. And this guy named Elliot Grudem that has this ministry to pastors and trying to help you grow even on some soft skills like emotional intelligence, things like that. And one of the things that Elliot brought up in that time was based on profile that I took, like an assessment profile, but also just getting to know me, is that my biggest leadership weakness is there's some guys that over control, they're going to inform people of what they need to do and be too directive. It can feel controlling, stifling, and that's one leadership, cliff you can fall off of. That usually is not the cliff for me. That would be rare for me for that to be the cliff. The cliff for me, and the thing that I'm learning and how I would answer your question that I can tend to fall off of, is almost more like abdication of responsibility and power. That power feels weird to me, and almost like even saying that word, it feels like that feels wrong, And so my biggest mistakes I've made in the 17 years of Redeemer have almost always been on like over delegating and like forgetting about a thing. It's like, hey, you're in charge of this or that ministry, and I'm going to kind of busy myself. I'm going to work hard at something, but I'm going to do something else over here. And then all of a sudden looking up months later, and that ministry area has gone completely sideways, has had zero management, zero attention, zero coaching, and it's gone really poorly. And maybe that person hasn't been gifted or able or skilled or motivated to be able to carry that forward, and just didn't pay enough attention to notice that it wasn't going well. And so I think one of the things that Elliot really pushed me on that I'm really conscious of is that, I'm going to be out and around. I had meetings last week out of town, but when I'm here, that walking around the office, being present, that ministry of presence. And it's also interesting, another thing that's interesting is when I'll ask my guys when I've been out, like for a sabbatical or something like that, some of my best leaders, it seems egotistical to ask this question, but I'll say, okay, what did you miss the most? But it's interesting that, for me, it's not so much like management oriented things, but a lot of it really is just presence. That I think it's one of the things that I'm really trying to practice a lot is being around. And it's just interesting the conversations you find yourself in with some of your staff and other leaders when you're around and when you just check in, and the kind of things you end up talking about are, I think, are really significant. And so I think that's a practice for me. And then another practice is like I've got these 4 main things that I have written on my board that are like really critical for someone in my role, and I have them in front of me all the time. And so like a couple of those are related to preaching and stuff that probably wouldn't relate to a lot of the people listening to this podcast, but some of them I think probably are related to like vision and really driving the vision. And that seems really obvious, but I'm not sure that's always been front and center for me over the years, is that there's other things to do in a church. People have needs, marriages are on fire, sermons need to be preached, and staff, organization has to be led. But it's just easy how like directional leadership on, but what are we doing and where are we headed specifically? Not just churches in general, but Redeemer in Lubbock at this time in 2024, that's my job to like, I'm not the only one. We have elders, we have senior staff, but I really need to be thinking about that and driving those conversations, at least like initiating that. Yeah. So those are 2 things that are on my mind the most when you ask that question, is really sitting in the world of vision and heralding it, making sure that that's on the radar, and then just that ministry of presence.
Yeah. And I would say, man, it's a really tough thing to keep vision in the front, right in front of you. How often do you revisit that? How often do you bring it to your elders, to your staff about, this is where we're going, this is the direction? When does that come up? Yeah,
hopefully it's coming up all the time. You could be a judge on if it's coming up a lot on Sundays and member meetings. Yeah. You could be a judge of that. So hopefully we're communicating it regularly. I don't know, but it's easy how you can let it fall off. Yeah. You really can, even in that. But specifically for me, what I mean is even with my senior executive leaders on our staff and our elders, it's just interesting how everything else in the world can take your time. Like when we meet, usually we've got somewhere between 8 and 10 bullet points of discussion, and none of them are vision every week. Yeah. It's problems. And that's leadership. Yeah. You're solving problems, and you should. And those problems need answers. And so for me, the way that I think we've tackled this problem is at least quarterly, we try to have a day where we get off site, and ideally even out of town. And they're like, today is a vision and strategy oriented day. And so we just try to carve out those times to where it's just specifically focused around asking those questions. And then we like to, once we have a little bit more clarity on some directional issues, we tend to bring those in the form of a proposal to our elders, which would be like in other organizations. This would be your board in a lot of ways, if you have that kind of structure in a company or business or not for profit. So we're driving that conversation. Now we still need to agree together as the whole group of elders on that, but we're kind of pace setting directional things. And sometimes those things don't happen, or they're significantly altered or modified, which I think is healthy. But we're just carving out time to talk about those things. And then once you've got a lot of clarity and you've got a commitment, then it's your job to communicate those things regularly and clearly.
Yeah. Okay. We're in January right now as this is filming, so may go out March or so, but this is New Year's resolution time. This is vision casting time. I mean, everybody's talking about what 2025 is going to look like, and so I just know there's pitfalls coming, even in my leadership. Of it's easy to talk about those things now, but in 2 months, there's going to be different things going on in the business, and it's hard to revisit those conversations. So the quarterly, with that intentionality, is huge. And as a member of Redeemer, I feel that, and I can see that. I sense the direction's always there, and not just with your leadership team, but making sure that that's a whole body who knows that. So
that's encouraging. Well, in terms of like it's encouraging to hear because I think my personal wiring is to chase the new shiny thing because I love ideas. One of my strengths is ideation on the Strengths Finder deal. So I can live in the world of ideas and new thoughts. And so the disciplined process of saying, no, we have a commitment. Like moving from ideas to commitment is language we use. Yeah. If you were at the member meeting the other night, but Keenan even used the language he's like, hey, we're committed to, and it doesn't matter for the listener what that thing is, like for Redeemer's vision with a second campus. But this is a commitment that we have. And I thought that was such significant language, and that's how we talk. Is this isn't just an idea, but a commitment, and staying clear on that, and revisiting it, and making sure that's still what we're committed to, and revisiting tactics to get to that commitment. Because a commitment's a commitment, and you find a way to get it done.
That's good. All right. Well, one thing that keeps coming to my mind as I'm hearing you talk is this balance, because you've got the church that you're leading, and you also have a family. Like, how do you balance those things out, and even the things that bring you joy? Like, how do you fit all that in, and do you feel like you're doing well at that?
I don't know, man. That's a great question. Probably need to get Amy or the boys on for that. But I don't know that everyone should try to do what we do, because for those that don't know my wife Amy, she's the CEO of the Lubbock market for Covenant. It's a gigantic job. I used to really be able to relate with the level of responsibility she had when she was the CEO of just the Children's Hospital. Not that that's just a small thing, but it felt relatable to me in terms of how many direct reports. But you're talking thousands of employees and a ton of responsibility, and healthcare is in a tough way right now with really thin margins, and profitability is really challenging. And they're not for profit, but like just maintaining like neutral on a whole health system is really challenging. And so connected to an organization in the Pacific Northwest. And so, we were moving fast and a lot of responsibility, and our dudes are really active with things. I mean, up until this time last year, Roman was still playing college baseball. So, I mean, really what a lot of it is we try to plan things out the best we can, but man, our hair is on fire all the time. So you probably need to talk to some other people on this question, because I feel like, man, we are just kind of every Sunday night we do it. Amy and I will sit down with our schedules. And sometimes you can look at each other's face going, man, I think we can get all this done, And so, I mean, the balance of it is that we are very committed to time with our kids, and we put boundaries around our time. Like, we're not going to work till 8 and 9 o'clock every night, and we're not going to be on the phone all night. And we work hard to not work on the weekends anytime we can. But we both go hard, and and honestly, so do our sons. They both go hard. And so there's just a lot going on. So I don't know that we do it well, but we're committed to those things, and we kind of a family values. We work hard and we play hard. We also, speaking of fly fishing, I bet I had a fly in the water more than any listener on this podcast. So let's see if we can see if that's true or not. But if Landon's listening, he would probably.
He's going to debate,
But we play hard. We do.
So where do you find your rest, your rejuvenation? I mean, if it's not in Colorado on a stream, I would say week to week, where do you find that time to kind of regroup?
Well, to me, there's like daily, weekly, and then like, seasonal patterns to that. So the seasonal one would be the thing you just mentioned of getting out of town, unplugging. And I think that is important, getting out of town, getting away from your computer, and being outside. That's really renewing to me. But, on a weekly level, that's my off days. So for me, that's Friday, Saturday, and I try to protect those. And if it's at all possible, I want to be at home. I want to be outside. I want to work with my hands, read a book, rest, watch a show. Those Friday will be by myself since everybody else is at school or work. Saturday's a family day. So those kind of regular rhythms, and that seems obvious, but it's just interesting how work can tend to, creep into that.
Yeah.
And it still fits that bucket when we're out and around, and it's at one of my kids' games or something like that. That isn't moving the ball vocationally, and that's restful for me. But then on a daily basis, I think that's where having just that regular time with God, and even the time where you're with your family or friends in the evening, and a little bit of time in the morning, I think those things are really significant. I think you just got to have that rhythm of work and rest on the daily and weekly and even like the seasonal levels. That's how I do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, that's good. All right. Well, I want to keep moving along, because the next question is, what pivotal moment in your career life has had the greatest impact on who you are today?
Yeah, I think there's one that stands out to me on this, that it's a really hard moment that a bunch of things were going wrong at the same time. This would have been when I was 25 years old, and I was having a church completely implode. My employment at a church implode, and more or less being forced to resign. Just in essence, no moral issue, but just a disagreement with me and the pastor, that we just were not aligned, is what I would say. And I think there was mutual fault for that in retrospect. But at the same time, my dad was very sick, and we had adopted my little brother, and his mom had already passed away before that. And so, dad was kind of at death's door pending a double lung transplant. Mm-hmm. And my little brother, Cody, came and lived with us. He's 14. And then dad ended up getting the double lung transplant, but his condition worsened and ended up dying at almost the same exact time I resigned from the church. And man, it was a brutal time, And I went through, now I think people would call it deconstruction of faith, where I just wondered if any of this stuff was real. And I was really mad at Christians in the church, but also wasn't sure that God was real, the Bible was real, like all the way to that level, which is funny that a pastor is on this podcast saying that, but that's where I was. And it was just a very disorienting time. Now, the positive of it was that, for the year or so of reading lots of books, and my wife Amy gave me lots of space to think it through and talk and listen and all those things, that my faith was restored, and actually to something I think more intellectually sound and all of that. But it was interesting because I just had a different perspective on leadership and even the church on the back end of it, because I'd always been on one end of it, where you're the church person wondering why everybody isn't up there 5 nights a week. What's everybody's deal? Mm-hmm. And now I'm sitting on the other side of it, working 60 hours a week, just working my brains out for hardly any money, and even going through a lot of faith crisis. And I just saw something different. And I would just say part of the problem, even with my deal with that pastor that I'd worked for, was I really thought I was more spiritual and a better leader than everybody up there. That's the reality of it. And there's another word for that, pride. And I was proud, really was. I was cocky. And I would say a lot of that was really dialed back. And so that moment for me was really significant, that I had a sense of empathy for what people were walking through, and even gratitude for God restoring my faith even over that time. And so there was just a lot of that stuff of a cocky young guy was dialed way, way back. And I had a different perspective on people and leading and what the goal is and all of this coming out of that, and out of real struggle.
Yeah. So what would you say to the person that's maybe in that right now? Like, not even necessarily something that's deconstructive or questioning, but just a really tough season of life. Having been through it, sitting where you're at right now, what encouragement would you have?
Well, it's tough. I've been there, and I wouldn't say that's the only time. That's the darkest point for me. I've had a couple other turns that are like, man, that was tough. It was a tough season. I wouldn't want to relive it. Man, what I would say is that, that this is where having some of these directional questions in life are so important. Of, okay, what's really worth living for, and what's all this about? Because usually, if you really look at it, usually these dark seasons, it's because something isn't working out, and we all have so much of our identity tied up. And that's one reason I think I just spun out. Some of it was my dad's death, but I think a lot of it was I built my identity of I'm okay because I'm a hotshot youth minister, and I'm this and I'm that. And I think that when that was all taken away, it's like, what even am I? And I think that's a lot of it. Is I think that's an invitation for you to press in a little bit of some identity questions about who are you really? And surely it's not that you're just Ruben the realtor. You're a good one of the best, but surely that you're more than that. Because what happens if you don't close that deal? What happens if you have a tough season where the sales slow up? And all of us, regardless of what industry we're in, that's always there. Like I look at my young guys, they're dealing with it too. Like JJ, my 15-year-old, is that, okay, so you have a stretch where you're not hitting the ball well in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, it can feel like a real crisis of what even am I if I'm not good,
Yeah.
And it's just an invitation of asking those questions on who you are and what really matters. So I would let that take you there. And the reality is, I think there's also going to be, I wouldn't want to say this to your face probably, but I'll say it on this podcast because some of it, I would just want to be a friend to somebody that was in this situation and just be there for them, have coffee. The little sermonettes didn't really mean much to me at all. In fact, sometimes they were counterproductive. But since I could safely do this on the airwaves here, I would just say, hey, look, you're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. And if you'll walk a path and learn from it and not get bitter, you'll come out on the other side a better leader and a firmer sense of identity, more security as a person. That those things there's invitations to go there with all of these things. That you can go there. Now, again, I wouldn't do that if this is you having this conversation. I just want to sit down and be your friend.
Just listen.
Because it's hard, man. It's so hard. Life is hard.
Yeah,
it really is.
That so you said sense of security, having gone through this, like a sense of groundedness, maybe after having been through a trial and then maybe have survived that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that could be. That's a good word for it. But I even mean, there's this fundamental question that every leader's asking whenever stuff goes sideways. It's like maybe somebody isn't following you. In fact, maybe you had some people, in my case, leave your church, or maybe you get fired, or in your case, maybe it's that you had a longtime customer that chose another realtor, or a staff member that you thought would be with you forever that goes out and forms their own brokerage or goes and works for somebody else. This sense of rejection and like, am I not enough? Is there something defective in me? It's like that space right there, that something's defective and wrong and messed up and broken. And I think that's the invitation, is that there's another way that, like I'm using for me, people leave churches all the time. And most of the time, it has nothing to do with me. I mean, they may not like my preaching or something. That's okay. I've had to come to grips with that. That's what it means to be an average preacher. Is not everybody's going to love it, But in all seriousness, though, most of the time, it's just people have needs for their family, and they just needed some other things, and they had to do something else, And it isn't necessarily a referendum on my quality of a person. And even if they didn't like my preaching or leadership, that it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. I can learn from that. There might be something to learn too. They might have a good point that I could grow. But I think that's where, there's an invitation of security, which I would see that deepest place of that in, that because through Jesus, that he gives us through the cross, this deep place of, hey, we are loved and accepted. And that's this deep anchor for me that really helps me in leadership. I know that not everyone's going to see it that way. I know there's some other ways to answer that don't have your identity going up and down like the stock market,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. What's one lesson that you know now that maybe you've learned along the way in your journey that you wish you would have known a little bit earlier in life?
Man, I think what I wish I would have known is that it's just going to be hard. That sometimes I can optimistically think, yeah, if we're doing it right, we can win people over. You can win your critics over. You can overcome almost any obstacle. And I think one thing I've had to learn is that, man, there are some unwinnable situations and people. There really are. That you're not going to win every deal. You're not going to win every critic over. And I think getting to a point of, and even, I don't know that anyone that's listening to this is going to be in the same boat, but I can sometimes have this fantasy. I'm going to finally get to this point where, even though we've got a pretty large church and a large church staff, that it's just all going to be smooth. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time I was getting coached by a guy that's a really good thinker about staffing and leadership. And I was almost like popping my knuckles on the call with him about how we'd made this hire, and I think we had it solved, and we'd figured out some things, reorganizing our org chart. And he basically almost jumped through the phone at me and said, hey, you haven't figured out anything. You're going to do nothing for the rest of your career but juggle staff. You're going to have some people succeed, some people that flounder and some people even that fail, that you have to do something different. And I think just getting to a point of like, you know what, where there's never going to be this smooth sailing point, and that you're going to be you know, dealing with good and bad staffing and painful things in people's lives, and not everyone's going to love it. And it's almost like for me a mentality of understanding that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to please everybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not going to do that, and I'm not going to win everyone over, and we're not going to make every hire right. We're not going to manage every employee right, and we want to do the best we can at every single one of those things. We don't want to unnecessarily create critics by poor leadership and a bunch of other things. But I think it really helps me to go, okay, you know, it's not going to always be great, you know, and just prepare your mind for it. And I think every good leader I've ever seen, if maybe I was going to add a third component to my earlier answer of, you know, you got a direction and you got people following you, is I think you need to be a dog. I think you need to be a dog.
Yeah.
I really do. Somebody that's got some grit and toughness. And I actually just read an article about that a while back, that if there's one key component of leadership that is like the defining thing, that is described as grit. And I'm calling it a dog.
Okay.
And somebody that can just overcome hurdles, and they're coming your way, you know?
Yeah. And is there a level of peace that you experienced whenever you kind of got that thought embedded in your mind that this is going to be hard?
Yeah, I think so, because I kept finding myself so disoriented when it was hard. Well, man, maybe I'm doing something wrong, you know, and thinking that it's just all should lay out in this idealistic way. And yeah, I think it does help me just prepare my mind, expecting it to be hard, you know, expecting obstacles, expecting that people aren't going to understand what you're talking about, and expecting staffing to be an ongoing challenge for any organization, including a church. And I think it does prepare me for that.
Yeah. I feel like when we get a little too comfortable and it's a little too easy, that's when we get thrown off a little bit more, just because we're kind of coasting, and that feels good.
But especially if you're me, I'm 52, and the tendency, whether you're in church work or you've started your own business, is to be the fat cat 50-year-old where you're just coasting. It's so everything inside of you is wanting to say, hey man, I'm just going to preach my sermons and show up and do my deal. And, you know, but then you really want to keep moving again in that direction. And where there's a clear objective and goal, and knowing there's going to be obstacles along the way. You know, and knowing that that's real.
All right. Well, you answered a question that I asked. It's always a hard one, which is, what's one book that has had a major impact on you? And this was the book that you talked about. So I want to dive into this for a second. This is the book Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. I have also just recently picked up this book because I've been listening to Arthur Brooks' podcast, and he's a great speaker. Haley teases me anytime I pick this up, because the subheading is Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life.
Yeah, you're a little young for it, man. A little young for it.
She's like, where are you going? Why are you aging a little quicker than you should? But he's got some great principles in here. I'd love to hear why this book has stood out to you.
Yeah, just reflecting on that, Ruben, first, I was just thinking, when I first got to know you, you were a single, just out of college guy, you know, so it's funny that we're even talking about a middle-aged book. But yeah, maybe you could. But yeah, I think the part where this book was so significant, and it's some of the themes we've been talking about today, that the book opens, and it's what inspired him was that he was on a plane, and right behind him was a guy that he never says who he is, but he said, if I were to mention his name, every reader in this book would know who this person is. And he's older, and he's crying to his wife about how he's probably in his 80s, about how he's no good for anybody. And he was just so taken back. Like, how can you say that with all that you've accomplished? How in the world can you say that your life hasn't meant anything? But then he began to do research and learned a lot of things. And there's a lot to this book, but I think one of the biggest ideas is that there's some bad news to it, and that's that there's a strength of a young man, and there's this ability to start things, build things, and that kind of strength, even stamina, capacity, that's the strength of a young man or woman, is that there's all of this. But there's actually cognitive decline. There's all these like really negative things that happen as you age. But the positive of what he's pointing out in this book is that there's another kind of strength that you move into in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. And there's a few things that actually get better. And so he's arguing to move from one kind of strength, and because you can really frustrate yourself if you continue to operate in the way you did in your 20s, 30s, and 40s as you move into your later 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, that you can find yourself really frustrated because you're not going to have some of those same abilities. They're just not there in the way they were, and it can really frustrate you. And he also pointed out that what ends up happening, we're not created to draft from past wins. We just aren't. So that's why that 80-year-old man that might have been a Hall of Fame quarterback or a Fortune 500 business person,
Yeah.
that you just think about how little of a bump you get every time you close a deal. Feels good. It's nice to get paid, but you just kind of move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And even if you get recognized, even if you're man of the year in Lubbock, we feel the losses really deeply, but wins just give us a little bit for you just don't draft. And he would make the case, the more status you have in your professional life, not necessarily who earned the most, but who had the most status, those are the people that tend to struggle more in retirement. So he argues to move into this other kind of strength that is a different kind of strength where you're able to synthesize thoughts. You actually can grow as a teacher in this age, which I guess that works out for me. I don't know if that's happened or not, but teaching, synthesizing ideas, coaching people, and the ability to, like you said, some of the best historians in the world are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, because that's what a great historian does, is pull all these streams of information into a story, and so you move into this other kind of strength that is more mentoring, synthesizing, teaching others. And I think that was what stood out to me so much about this book, is that I really want that to be about this next chapter for me. Is I'm not personally going to go plant another church. That's a 30-year-old guy's game. But what I can do is I can teach people the Bible, synthesize the Bible in a way that they can understand. But also I can train and develop other leaders and coach them, invest in them, church planters, missionaries, and I can invest in these people. Yeah. And I could do that even beyond what I'm getting paid to do it, and that actually is a really encouraging thought. And he even talks a lot about even pushing back against that love of status. And there's that security issue again, is he would just say, you need to start addressing that right now. He would even say, it's not like an explicitly Christian book either. Like, start thinking about your death. Yeah. It sounds morbid, but like, come to grips with it and don't love the limelight too much and the acclaim, because it's fool's gold.
Yeah. It's crazy to me to think like how short-lived most success is, even if you've been working on years and years to get to that point, and then it fades quickly. And what do you think then, like in your journey in teaching and being able to mentor, what is some of the biggest satisfaction for you? What does that last longer in your experience than the success has from fame or from accomplishing a certain goal? Do you see that the mentorship and the teaching, that lives longer?
Yeah, it seems like it. I think it's some of the things that in retrospect, that have been the most significant to me about Redeemer is like some of our church plants of some of the leaders that have come through this church that have went and planted, seeing some young leaders that have went from, college student to executive pastor. Keenan Harris, Sarah Khan, one of our senior ministry directors, was a college student here, and to have seen some of these leaders that have went from legitimately every iteration, from maybe like brand new Christian to what they're doing with their families, what they're doing with their career. And that's just even internally at Redeemer. But I get as much joy watching you and Tanner, and watching guys, again, the formerly cool college guy that now are raising children and are like doing great stuff, crushing it in their careers. And those things really do, like, they're really meaningful to me, a lot more than looking on a spreadsheet to see how many people were there on a Sunday. Even though I do want to reach as many people as we can, that seeing like people follow Jesus and do work in an awesome way where they're planted, like those things really go a long way to me.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. We're going to get this book out to somebody who's following, so you can write a little note in it of encouragement. Right. It's going to go out to them, and hopefully it'll impact them, and maybe they'll be 50 plus. If not, maybe some 25-year-olds will.
I would encourage them to be maybe a little bit on the second half. It might be good. It might be good.
There's some good pointers though. He talks a lot about satisfaction in general, like in his podcast too, and not seeking pleasure, but seeking satisfaction and enjoyment, which usually includes other people. it's not a self-centered thing. It's sharing experiences with people are what creates some of the biggest moments of joy. So
I'm glad you could take
love
something
that.
from it being
There
such a
you
young
go.
pup.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that young. All right. Well, lastly, I'd love to just hear, like, how would you define leadership in a single sentence?
Yeah, I think I might just incorporate all three components, that I was, the taking people in directions. You got people following you um, to a destination. So those two components, people following you to a destination and expecting obstacles. I think
Yeah.
those would be the three things.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Well, man, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining today. I feel like you talked a lot about commitment, which I love. And then I just heard also this emphasis on your family and the emphasis on just teaching and training people,
Yeah,
whether
thanks,
they're
man.
right next to you or a few decades behind. Although my white hair is indicating
getting
that I
mixed in.
might
Maybe
I
you
might
need
be nearing this a little bit.
Maybe
quicker.
you need to pay attention to it. I don't know. Talk with Haley about that. No, I enjoyed it, man. Thanks for the conversation.